Nobody here will miss you. You don't belong in this room. This is a leadership event for people who actually built something. 3 years out of work, Gavin. Everyone in this building already knows it.
Please don't make a scene.
I'm just here for the announcement. The announcement. You actually invited him?
Gavin, go home.
Security. I'll say this exactly once. Walk out that door on your own, or I walk you out in front of everyone here. I'd rather stay. Nobody here will miss you.
Gavin, don't ruin the most important night of my life.
Okay, shall we get started? Ladies and gentlemen, tonight marks the beginning of a new chapter for North Star Dynamics. It is my privilege to introduce the man who will be taking full ownership of this company, effective immediately. Mr. Gavin Mercer.
My name is Gavin Mercer. For 3 years, everyone who knew me believed I had fallen apart, that I'd walked away from a successful career in corporate restructuring and had nothing to show for it. My wife believed it. Her colleagues believed it. The man she was sleeping with believed it most of all. None of them knew that while they were pitying me, I had spent those 3 years quietly building something, and that the company at the center of everything they thought they'd won was already mine. This is the story of the night they found out. If you're new here, this channel is where we tell stories about people who stayed quiet when everyone expected them to break. If that's the kind of story you want to hear, subscribe before you keep reading. There's a lot more where this came from. 3 years ago, I walked away from the only career I had ever known. Not because I failed at it, because I trusted the wrong person inside it. His name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what he did, and what I decided to do afterward. He fed proprietary information from a deal we were co-leading to a competing bidder the night before closing. We lost the contract. The firm lost 8 figures. And he walked into the partner's office the next morning and told them I had been the one managing the data room access. I could have fought it. I had the emails, I had the timestamps, I had everything I needed to prove what actually happened. Instead, I resigned, transferred my licenses, and spent 6 weeks alone in a rented apartment outside Philadelphia, building a spreadsheet that would eventually become the investment thesis behind Mercer Capital Group, a private fund registered under a holding structure that carries my name, nowhere on the front page. I let people think I had fallen apart. It was easier than explaining what I was building, and the silence protected the work. What I didn't account for was what 3 years of silence would cost me inside my own home. Serena and I met when I was still someone she could point to at a dinner party and feel proud of. She was ambitious in the way that made you want to be better, sharp-focused, always 2 moves ahead in a conversation. I admired that about her. I still do. Even now, when admiration is about the only clean feeling I have left. When I stopped being someone she could show off, something between us began to shift. I watched it happen and told myself it was temporary, that once the fund was up and running, once the first major acquisition closed, I could explain everything and she would understand. People who love each other are capable of understanding. I was wrong about the timing. I may have been wrong about a few other things as well. She started coming home later. Started mentioning Bryce Langdon, the way people mention someone when they've already decided that person is important. Bryce handled the Carlisle pitch himself. Bryce restructured the entire regional budget in 1 quarter. Bryce actually understands what it takes to operate at this level. She never said it unkindly. That was almost worse. She said it the way you'd comment on the weather. A simple fact about the world that she expected me to agree with. I didn't know she was sleeping with him. I want to be honest about that. I suspected the marriage was ending. I did not know why or how far things had already gone. My fund identified North Star Dynamics 14 months before the acquisition closed. The numbers were bad in the way that experienced people recognize immediately. And inexperienced people keep explaining away. Revenue figures that didn't track against the operational reports, vendor contracts priced 30% above market rate, all routed through a cluster of LLCs with overlapping registered agents. A benefits fund that had been drawing down for 2 years without a corresponding increase in employee headcount or compensation. Someone inside that company was extracting money in layers, not recklessly, but methodically. The kind of methodology that requires both access and cover. You need someone with financial authority to move the numbers, and someone with communications authority to make sure no one looks too closely. It took us 4 months to map the full structure. When we did, the name at the center of it was Bryce Langdon. The name just below his, managing the narrative around every quarterly report, was Serena Mercer. I sat with that information for 11 days before I could think about it clearly. I want to be precise about what I felt during those 11 days, because it matters to the decisions I made afterward. I was not primarily angry. Anger would have been simpler. What I felt was something closer to grief, for the version of my wife I had believed in, and for the years I had spent protecting a silence that she had already decided to fill with something else. The betrayal of the marriage and the betrayal of 800 employees whose jobs were being quietly dismantled to cover Bryce's losses were 2 separate things, and I had to hold them separately, or I would have made decisions that were only about me. I chose to proceed with the acquisition. The board of North Star, led by Leonard Shaw, was desperate for a buyer with the liquidity and the operational experience to stabilize the company before it hit the press. Shaw knew who I was. He did not know that Serena worked there. I did not tell him. We agreed on one condition from the start. The identity of the buyer would remain confidential until the formal handover event. If Bryce or anyone else on the senior team knew the company was already sold, they would have days to move assets and construct cover stories. The confidentiality wasn't theater. It was the only way to ensure that the people who had been stealing from this company for 2 years couldn't finish the job before we could stop them. Serena told me not to come to the party. She said it carefully, the way she had learned to say difficult things to me, wrapped in enough practical reasoning that it didn't sound like what it was. It's a leadership event, Gavin. These are people I work with every day. I need them to see me a certain way, and showing up with... She paused. I just think it's better if you stay home. I told her I understood. I drove to the venue alone and arrived 40 minutes before the program was scheduled to begin. The ballroom at the Meridian Center held close to 300 people. Floor lighting, circular tables, a stage at the far end with a lectern, and a screen that was already cycling through a promotional reel the communications team had assembled. Interviews with staff, aerial footage of the 3 manufacturing facilities out in Harrisburg and Reading and Trenton, B-roll of the executive floor. I noticed the security camera placement when I walked in. Old habit, I spent 3 years in distressed asset acquisition learning to read a building's infrastructure before I read its financials. The cameras were ceiling-mounted at 6-foot intervals along the perimeter, with 2 wide-angle units positioned above the stage on either side. The feed was almost certainly being routed to a central server somewhere in the building's IT system. The promotional reel on the stage screen had pulled interior footage from the same system you could tell by the timestamp watermarks in the lower right corner that had been cropped but not fully removed. I noted it. I didn't think much more about it at the time. I was crossing toward the far side of the room when I saw them. A side corridor partially visible through a propped-open service door, Bryce with his hand against the wall above Serena's shoulder, her face tilted up toward him, their voices low. I could not hear what they were saying. I didn't need to hear all of it. The body language was 12 years of marriage telling me something I had almost already accepted. Then Bryce pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her, and I could see from the angle that it was a slide text and numbers, the kind of thing you show someone when you're walking them through a plan. Serena nodded, said something, nodded again. And in her face, there was not excitement or guilt, or even the particular expression of someone doing something they know is wrong. There was focus. The same focus she brought to every project she believed in. Whatever they were planning, she was not a passenger in it. I moved back into the main room before either of them looked up. I had understood for months that Serena knew about the financial irregularities. The communications strategy she had built around North Star's quarterly reports was too precise to have been constructed without someone explaining to her what it needed to cover. But there is a difference between knowing something analytically and seeing it in a person's face. I saw it. And I understood that the plan Bryce had shown her on that phone screen was almost certainly the restructuring proposal, the one that recommended closing 3 facilities and eliminating 400 positions in order to make the balance sheet legible to an incoming owner, who wouldn't know what had caused the damage. They were going to hand the new owner a company that looked cleaner than it was and let 400 people absorb the cost of that illusion. I found Leonard Shaw near the bar and told him quietly to hold the announcement. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has managed enough crises to know when he's standing at the edge of one. "How long?" he said. "I don't know yet," I said. "But hold it." He nodded once. He didn't ask questions. That was the thing about Shaw at his best. He trusted the people he had vetted. I was counting on that. I was standing near the entrance when Bryce crossed the room toward me. He had Serena on his arm. Not discreetly, deliberately. He stopped 2 feet in front of me and looked at me with the calm of someone who has never experienced a consequence he couldn't manage. "This section is reserved for company leadership and invited guests," he said. "You don't qualify as either." "I was invited," I said. "By who?" I didn't answer. He leaned in slightly. "Gavin, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave this room, as a courtesy. Because Serena asked me to extend you that courtesy, and I'm choosing to honor it." He glanced at her. "Against my better judgment." Serena said, "Gavin, please." I looked at her. For a moment, a real moment, not a polite pause. She looked back at me with something that wasn't quite the expression she'd been wearing all evening. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then Bryce put his hand at the small of her back, and she looked away. That was the moment I knew she had made her choice. Not tonight. A long time ago. "I'm staying," I said. Bryce hit me in one motion. Open palm, no wind-up. The way someone swats something they consider beneath contempt. The sound was loud enough that the nearest table went quiet. I didn't move. I didn't reach up to touch my face. I stood there and let the moment exist without reacting to it, which is the only thing you can do with a man like Bryce Langdon, that he genuinely doesn't know how to answer. From across the room near the corridor entrance, I could see Maya Torres standing with a folder pressed to her chest, watching the whole thing with the expression of someone who has been waiting for disaster to arrive and has finally stopped being surprised that it has. I looked at her. Then I looked at the stage screen where the promotional reel was still playing, the security camera footage cycling through in the background of every carefully composed shot. I looked back at Bryce. I stepped aside and let him walk past me toward the stage. He had just made the single most important mistake of his career, and he was smiling when he made it. I found Maya Torres in the side corridor 3 minutes after Bryce walked away. She was still holding the folder, both arms wrapped around it the way you hold something when you're not sure if you're protecting it or using it to protect yourself. She was watching the main room through the gap in the service door, and she didn't hear me coming until I was already standing beside her. She turned fast, took a step back. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said. She studied my face. Her eyes moved to the mark on my cheek where Bryce had hit me, then back up. "You're Serena's husband." I am. Then you should know that anything I tell you... She stopped, started again. If Bryce finds out I talked to anyone tonight, I lose everything. My license, my career. He's already told me what he'll do. What did he tell you? She exhaled slowly. That if I didn't sign off on the Q3 reconciliation reports, he would report me to the SEC for the discrepancies he created. He has emails that look like they came from me. He had someone in IT build the trail over 4 months. She pressed the folder tighter against her chest. I've been a financial manager for 11 years. I have never taken a dollar that wasn't mine. And he built a paper record that says otherwise. I knew most of this already from the fund's analysis. But there's a difference between knowing something from documents and hearing it from the person it was done to. It changes the weight of it. The folder, I said. What's in it? Originals. The actual transfer authorizations before the figures were altered. I made copies the week before he locked me out of the system. She looked at me steadily. But if I hand these to anyone inside this building tonight, he'll know within the hour. He controls the document management system. He controls IT security. If he gets one alert that these records are being reviewed, he'll wipe the server, and I become the only person left holding evidence that looks like it belongs to the person who committed the fraud. He won't get that alert, I said. She looked at me the way people look at a statement they want to believe and can't afford to. I have a legal team outside this building right now, I said. They've been waiting for my signal for 2 hours. The moment I authorize it, they begin a full backup of every server in this building, financials, communications, system logs, all of it. Bryce won't know until it's already done. A long pause. Who are you? She said. Give me 40 minutes, I said. Then you'll know. I sent the authorization from a text to a number that was not in my phone's contact list, typed from memory, deleted immediately afterward. 40 seconds later, I received a single-word reply. Confirmed. Then I walked back into the ballroom. Bryce White was holding court near the front of the room. 3 members of the board arranged around him in the loose configuration of men who have decided someone is worth listening to. He was confident in the specific way that comes from never having been publicly wrong. Not from intelligence or preparation, but from the accumulated momentum of always being the most aggressive person in any given room. I crossed directly toward him. He saw me coming and didn't change his expression. That was deliberate. He wanted the room to see that I didn't warrant a reaction. The restructuring proposal, I said loud enough for the board members to hear. The one you're planning to present to the new ownership tonight. Walk me through the facility closures. A beat of silence. You need to leave, Bryce said. 3 plants, Harrisburg, Reading, Trenton. 400 jobs. I'm curious about the methodology. I kept my voice level. Because, from the numbers I've seen, those facilities are underperforming because of vendor contracts that are priced at a 30% markup above market rate. Contracts that route through a set of LLCs with the same registered agent. I paused. Closing the plants doesn't fix that problem. It just buries it. One of the board members, a man in his 60s, with the expression of someone who has sat through enough presentations to know when a number doesn't track, turned slightly toward Bryce. Bryce smiled. The smile of a man recalculating in real time and deciding he's still ahead. Gentlemen, he said, this is Serena's husband. He's been out of work for 3 years. He has a personal grievance and apparently decided this was the appropriate venue to air it. He looked at me directly. I think we've been patient enough. He picked up his laptop from the table beside him and opened it. Since we're on the subject, he said, I'll show you exactly what the restructuring proposal looks like, so there's no confusion about the methodology. He turned the screen toward the board members and logged into the company's internal presentation system. You'll see that every recommendation is grounded in operational data from the last 6 quarters. He began walking them through it. Plant closure timelines, headcount reduction phasing, budget reallocation toward a set of external consulting firms, names I recognized from the fund's research as entities with no verifiable operational history registered in the previous 18 months. Serena appeared at the edge of the group. She had seen me come back into the room, and she positioned herself beside Bryce with the deliberate calm of someone executing a plan they've rehearsed. "The communication strategy around the restructuring has already been drafted," she said to the board members, not looking at me. "We can manage the public narrative in a way that protects the brand and frames this as a necessary evolution." 400 people, I said. She looked at me then. "Companies survive by making difficult decisions." 400 people, I said again. "With families, with mortgages, with kids in school. You're going to cut their health care and call it brand protection?" Something moved across her face. Not guilt, something older than guilt. The expression of a person who made a decision a long time ago and has spent enough time defending it that they've almost convinced themselves it was reasonable. She looked away. My phone vibrated once in my jacket pocket. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. One vibration was the signal we had agreed on. The backup was complete. Every file, every transfer record, every email thread and system log in Northstar's servers now existed on an encrypted external drive in the hands of my legal team parked in a car 2 blocks from this building. Bryce had logged into the system to show his proposal to the board. He had opened the door himself. We had walked through it. I was about to speak when I saw Bryce's hand tighten on the edge of his laptop. He had received an alert. He closed the laptop in one motion and looked up at me with an expression I had not seen from him yet. Not anger, but the specific focus of a man who has just understood that something is happening that he cannot charm or pressure his way out of. "You accessed our system," he said. "No. Someone accessed our system from outside this building in the last 10 minutes. You're going to tell me that's a coincidence?" "I'm going to tell you nothing," I said. "That's not a conversation I need to have with you." He turned to the 2 security guards who had drifted back to the edge of our group. "Detain him, both of them, him and the Torres woman. Unauthorized access to proprietary company systems. I want them out of this building, and I want a lawyer on the phone in the next 5 minutes." The board members looked at each other. Serena stepped forward. "Gavin has a history of instability since he left his firm. He's been fixated on my career for months. Everything he's doing tonight is personal." She delivered it calmly with the measured authority of someone who has spent years managing how information lands in a room. "I'm sorry that this became a disruption. It won't affect our operational planning." 2 of the board members began to look uncertain, not because they believed her, but because they were the kind of men who became very uncomfortable when the cost of finding out the truth felt higher than the cost of not finding it. Leonard Shaw appeared beside me. "Gavin," he said quietly, pulling me a half step aside. "Let me tell you what I'm hearing in this room right now. These men are worried. Not about Bryce, not about you. About the company's value if this becomes a public event tonight. If there's a way to handle this quietly, terminate Langdon, remove Serena from her role, compensate the Torres woman for her silence. The board will support a clean transition. No one needs to know what happened here." I looked at him. Maya Torres has worked in financial management for 11 years and never taken a dollar that wasn't hers. Bryce spent 4 months building a paper trail designed to send her to prison for what he did. You're asking me to pay her to stay quiet about that? Shaw was silent. And the 400 people in Harrisburg and Reading and Trenton, I said. What do we pay them? That's not what I know what you're saying, Leonard. I know exactly what you're saying. I kept my voice low. And I understand why you're saying it. You built this company, and you don't want to watch it burn on the night you hand it over. I respect that. But if we bury this, the next person Bryce works for goes through the same thing, and the people after them. And it keeps going because it always keeps going when you pay people to be quiet about it. Shaw looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. Then he walked back toward the board members without responding. I didn't know which way he was going to land. That was the first thing all evening I was genuinely uncertain about. Bryce moved fast when he decided to move. He had someone in the IT department, a deputy systems administrator, who owed him a favor involving a performance review, remotely wipe the email archive associated with the fund transfer authorizations. He deleted 14 months of correspondence from 2 accounts. He locked Maya's credentials out of every system she had access to. And he handed the board a document, printed, not digital, which told me it had been prepared in advance, alleging that I had coordinated the unauthorized server access as part of a scheme to manipulate the acquisition price of North Star Dynamics. The communications were fabricated. I knew that because the contact named in the document was a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in 22 months. But fabricated documents have a way of doing their job before anyone has time to verify them. The board looked at the papers, they looked at each other, and the senior members said the words I had been hoping not to hear. We need to pause the transfer of ownership pending a review. Bryce turned to the security team. Get them out. Serena stood very still. And then she stepped forward and said clearly in front of the full room, Gavin and I are done. This marriage is over. Everything he's done tonight is about punishing me for moving on. That's all this is. The room absorbed that. I watched it happen, watched the narrative calcify in real time. Watched the evening rearrange itself around a story that made me the unstable ex-husband and Bryce the competent executive protecting his company from a personal vendetta. It was a good story. Serena had always known how to build a good story. Maya was beside me now. She said quietly, The copies I had, he took them. I saw one of the security guards go to the parking structure 20 minutes ago. Bryce sent him. The folder is gone. I filed that away. Bryce had his own people watching Maya from the moment she arrived, which meant he had known she was carrying something and had been waiting for the right moment to act on it. I didn't respond immediately. I was looking at the stage, at the screen, at the promotional reel that was still cycling on a loop because no one had thought to turn it off. Interior footage, staff interviews, aerial shots of the facilities. All of it assembled by the communications department from raw material pulled out of the security camera system. Pulled from the security camera system. Which meant the raw material still existed somewhere. How long has that reel been in production? I said. Maya looked at the screen. Serena's team started cutting it about 6 weeks ago. And the source footage? Where does it live before the edit? She was quiet for 2 seconds. Cloud backup, automatic, 30-day retention window. She looked at me. But Serena would have deleted anything she didn't want in the final cut. She would have deleted it from the editing system, I said. The automatic backup runs independently of the editing system. Maya understood what I meant before I finished saying it. I looked at the stage one more time at the screen at the timestamp watermarks in the corner of the security footage. Everything Bryce had done to Maya had happened in this building, in rooms with cameras. The security guard touched my arm. Sir, I need you to come with me. One moment, I said. I took out my phone and sent a second message to the number I had used earlier. 4 words. check the cloud backup. Then I put the phone in my pocket and walked toward the exit. I looked at Leonard Shaw on my way out. He was watching me leave. And in his face, for the first time all evening, I saw something that looked less like pragmatism and more like a man who was beginning to understand that he had just asked the wrong person to take the quiet road. They put us in a conference room on the second floor with a glass wall facing the corridor and a security guard posted outside the door. Maya sat across from me at the long table, her hands flat on the surface in front of her, fingers spread the way you press your palms down when you're trying to stop them from shaking. "If the backup doesn't have what we need," she said, "we're done. They'll file the unauthorized access complaint tonight, and by morning, Bryce's lawyers will have built enough of a case to freeze the acquisition indefinitely. He knows people on the Financial Crimes Task Force. He's done favors for them." She paused. "He told me that once, like it was something to be proud of." "The backup will have it," I said. "You don't know that. I know that Serena's team started pulling security footage 6 weeks ago. I know the automatic cloud backup runs on a 30-day rolling cycle independent of the editing system. And I know that Bryce stopped being careful about what he did in this building a long time ago, because careful people don't do what he did to you in an office with a ceiling-mounted camera and assume no one will ever look at the recording." She was quiet for a moment. "He never looked up," she said, almost to herself. "Every time he came into my office, every time he stood over my desk and told me what I was going to sign, he never once looked up at the camera." "People who've never been caught don't think about cameras," I said. "They think about witnesses. Witnesses can be pressured. Witnesses can be discredited." I looked at her. "He spent 4 months building a paper trail to use against you, because that's the threat he understands. He never considered that the ceiling was watching him do it." My phone buzzed against the table. I looked at the screen. A message from my lead counsel, 2 sentences. "Cloud archive intact. 30 days of footage, including 6 relevant segments. Standing by for your instruction." I turned the phone around so Maya could read it. She read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and pressed both hands over her face and didn't say anything for a long time. The security guard outside was young and uncertain, in the way of someone who has been told to hold a position without being told why. When I knocked on the glass and told him I needed to speak with Leonard Shaw immediately, he made the call. Shaw arrived 7 minutes later. He came alone, which told me something. A man who had already made up his mind to side with Bryce would have brought Bryce's lawyer with him. He opened the door and stood in the frame. "Talk," he said. "My legal team has recovered 30 days of unedited security camera footage from the cloud backup system. The editing suite your communications department used to build the promotional reel pulled from the same source. The raw archive was never touched because no one thought to look for it." I kept my voice flat and informational, the way I'd learned to present findings in acquisition reviews. "Among the footage, 6 segments recorded in this building over the past 6 weeks. Bryce Langdon pressuring Maya Torres to falsify transfer authorization documents. Bryce Langdon directing a transfer of company funds to a set of shell entities. Bryce Langdon explicitly threatening Ms. Torres with criminal prosecution if she refused to comply." I paused. "Also, a conversation between Bryce Langdon and Serena, in which she confirms she understands the nature of the financial irregularities and agrees to construct a communication strategy to redirect accountability toward lower-level staff." Shaw said nothing. "The fabricated documents Bryce presented to the board tonight allege that I accessed non-public financial information to manipulate the acquisition price," I continued. "My fund identified North Star's irregularities through publicly available filings, vendor registration records, and SEC disclosures. Every step of our due diligence is documented and time-stamped. The acquisition price reflects the company's actual financial condition, including the liability created by the fraud. We paid less because the company is worth less because of what Bryce did to it. I looked at him steadily. There is no manipulation. There is just math. Shaw walked to the chair at the end of the table and sat down heavily. If I authorize the release of this footage tonight, I said, the board will have everything they need to reverse the suspension and complete the ownership transfer. Bryce will be arrested before the end of the week. Maya will be cleared. And 3 manufacturing facilities with 400 employees will still be open in the morning. Shaw put his hands together on the table and looked at them. And Serena. Serena will be terminated for cause: complicity in financial misconduct and abuse of communications authority. I let that settle. I'm not adding anything. I'm not asking for anything beyond what the evidence shows she actually did. She's your wife. She made her choices, I said. I'm not going to make them for her, and I'm not going to protect her from them. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that isn't hesitation. It's someone finishing a calculation they already knew the answer to and making sure they've done it right. I'll authorize the footage review, he said finally. And I'll call the board back together. He stood up, paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I told you to take the quiet road because I thought that's what a smart man would do. A beat. I've been in this industry for 40 years. I've taken the quiet road more times than I can count. He pushed the door open. I'm not certain that was always the right call. He left before I could respond, which was probably the right instinct on his part. They brought us back into the ballroom 22 minutes later. In those 22 minutes, Bryce attempted to leave the building through the parking structure and was stopped by 2 members of my legal team who had been positioned there since 9 o'clock. They had no legal authority to detain him, but they informed him that the Financial Crimes Unit of the District Attorney's Office had been formally notified of potential securities fraud and would likely be in contact by morning. Bryce responded by calling his personal attorney and then spending the remainder of those 22 minutes in his car. Serena did not attempt to leave. She remained in the ballroom, standing near the bar, and by the time I returned, she was the only person in that section of the room. The guests who had been near her had drifted away with the quiet efficiency of people who have learned to read a situation before it becomes official. The board had gathered near the stage. Shaw stood at the lectern and did not use the microphone this time. He spoke to the room at a normal volume, and the room was quiet enough that everyone could hear him. We've completed a preliminary review of security footage recovered from this building's cloud archive system. The footage is contemporaneous, unedited, and verified by the building's IT infrastructure team. Based on the content of that footage, the board is rescinding its suspension of the ownership transfer and reinstating the original agreement effective immediately. He paused. Gavin Mercer is the owner of North Star Dynamics. That has been true since 11 o'clock this morning, when the final paperwork was executed. Tonight was meant to be a formality. Another pause. It became something else. I accept a portion of the responsibility for that, and I'll be addressing that separately with the board. He stepped back from the lectern and nodded at me. I didn't have a speech prepared. I had never intended to make one. But the room was looking at me, and the people in it deserved more than a prepared statement. So I stood at the lectern and said what I actually thought. I bought this company because the numbers told me it was being destroyed from the inside by people who were more interested in protecting themselves than in running a business. That's a financial problem. With a financial solution, you replace the people, you clean up the structure, you rebuild. I looked out at the room. But the numbers don't tell you about Maya Torres, who spent 4 months being threatened and isolated and set up to take the fall for something she had nothing to do with. The numbers don't tell you about the 400 people in the facilities who are going to lose their jobs and their health care so that a balance sheet could look cleaner for 30 days. The numbers don't tell you what it actually costs when a company decides that the most expendable asset it has is the people who do the work. I paused. So here's what happens next. The restructuring proposal presented tonight is withdrawn in full. The 3 manufacturing facilities stay open. The vendor contracts priced above market rate will be renegotiated or terminated, and the budget recovered from those contracts will be redirected to operations. The employees who are threatened with termination or prosecution will have those actions reversed, and they'll receive compensation for what was done to them. I looked at Maya, who was standing near the side wall. Maya Torres will head an independent internal oversight division reporting directly to the board, because the person who should be watching a system is the person who already knows how it can fail. I let that land before I continued. A whistleblower protection fund will be established as a permanent part of this company's governance structure. Anyone who identifies misconduct will have access to independent legal counsel and financial protection while any claim is investigated. No one in this company will ever again have to choose between telling the truth and keeping their job. The room was very still. Bryce Langdon is being referred to the district attorney's office for investigation into securities fraud, falsification of financial records, and criminal threatening. The board will cooperate fully with that investigation. Any assets traceable to the fraud will be pursued for recovery through civil litigation. I took a breath. Serena Mercer's contract with North Star Dynamics is terminated effective tonight for complicity in financial misconduct and abuse of communications authority. She is being terminated for what she actually did, documented in the footage the board has reviewed. Nothing more. I stepped back from the lectern. She was waiting near the exit, not blocking it, standing a few feet to the side in the particular way of someone who wants to speak to you but doesn't want to look like they're waiting. "You could have left my name out of it," she said when I stopped. "No," I said. "I couldn't." "Gavin?" Her voice was lower now, the professional composure mostly gone. "We're still married. Whatever happened between us, whatever I did, I'm still your wife." "I know that." "Then you know that what you just did in there will follow me for the rest of my career. No one is going to hire me into a communications leadership role after tonight." "Probably not," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone searching for the version of a person they used to know and not finding them in the face in front of her. "Is this about the slap? Because you could have had Bryce arrested for that. You didn't need all of this to—" "It's not about the slap," I said. "The slap hurt for about 10 seconds. What you and Bryce planned to do to those 400 families would have hurt for the rest of their lives." I kept my voice even. "I'm not angry at you for not loving me anymore. I understand that. I was gone for 3 years in ways that mattered, and I didn't give you a reason to stay. That's on me." I paused. "But you knew what Bryce was doing to Maya. You helped him make sure no one would look at it too closely. You were going to let her spend the next 10 years of her life fighting a fraud case she didn't commit? And you were going to let 400 people lose their livelihoods so that Bryce could hand a clean balance sheet to a buyer he didn't know was already me." I looked at her steadily. "I can't protect you from the consequences of that. I wouldn't, even if I could." She didn't answer. I reached into my jacket and took out an envelope and placed it on the small table beside the exit. "Divorce papers," I said. "Already signed. The attorneys will handle the rest. I'm not contesting anything that's yours, and I'm not asking for anything that isn't mine." She looked at the envelope, then at me. Something passed across her face, not anger, not grief exactly. The expression of a person arriving very late at an understanding they should have reached a long time ago. I left her standing by the door. 6 months later, North Star Dynamics posted its first profitable quarter in 3 years, without closing a single facility or reducing the benefits of a single employee. The vendor contracts had been renegotiated, 6 of them terminated outright, and the recovery from those contracts alone had covered the operational gap that Bryce had been using as justification for the restructuring. Maya presented the financial summary at the company-wide meeting herself. She stood at the front of the room with the ease of someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space, and she walked through the numbers with the clarity of a person who had spent 11 years learning exactly how numbers could be used to tell the truth or to obscure it, and had finally been given a structure where the truth was what was required. Bryce's trial date was set for the following spring. His attorneys had spent 4 months attempting to suppress the security footage on technical grounds. They hadn't succeeded. Serena had relocated. I heard this through channels I hadn't sought out. The information arrived the way information does when enough people know enough things. She was doing communications consulting on a freelance basis. She had not returned to corporate leadership. I didn't know if that was temporary or permanent, and I found when I thought about it that I didn't spend much time trying to determine which. Leonard Shaw resigned from the board the month after the acquisition closed. He submitted a formal letter of apology to the board, to Maya, and to the employees of the 3 facilities. It was not a short letter. He had been in the industry for 40 years, and he had taken the quiet road more times than he could count, and he was at the end of it a man with enough self-honesty to write down what that had cost. I kept the letter. Maybe because it's useful to have evidence that people can surprise you, even late. The anniversary event was held in the same ballroom at the Meridian Center. Someone on the planning committee had noted this and asked whether I wanted a different venue. I told them no. Rooms don't carry what happened in them. People do. Before the program began, I stood alone for a moment at the spot near the entrance where Bryce had hit me. I looked at my left hand. The ring had been gone for 6 months. I had taken it off the morning after the handover, not in anger, not in grief, but in the recognition that there are things you hold past the point when holding them serves anyone, and it's better to set them down cleanly than to let them go by attrition. The room filled up around me. The same ballroom, different weight. When it was time, I didn't stay at the podium long. I said what I had been thinking on the drive over, that a year ago, this company had been 3 months from insolvency, and the reason it was standing now had nothing to do with the acquisition. It had to do with the people who had refused to let it be gutted quietly, with the ones who kept copies of documents they were told not to keep, with the ones who had watched something wrong happening and stayed in the building and waited for someone to finally ask the right question. I stepped down from the stage and found a seat at one of the tables near the back, between a production supervisor from the Trenton facility who had been 10 days from his termination notice and a junior accountant from Maya's team who had started the month after the handover. They didn't know who I was at first. We talked for a while before they figured it out. By then, it didn't seem to matter much. That was the point. There's a version of this story where I walk up on that stage the moment after Bryce hit me and announce who I am and destroy him in front of everyone. And maybe that would have felt satisfying for a few minutes, but it wouldn't have saved Maya. It wouldn't have protected the evidence. It wouldn't have kept 400 jobs intact. It would have just been a man with power using it to make himself feel better, which is exactly what Bryce had been doing all along. The difference between revenge and justice is simple. Revenge stops the person who hurt you. Justice stops them from hurting the next person. Bryce never looked up at the camera because he had never been caught. He had learned over years that the only thing standing between him and consequences was whether anyone was watching. He was always watching for witnesses. He never thought about the ceiling. Stay quiet long enough, and people will show you exactly who they are. Then you'll know what to do with what you've seen. If this story stayed with you, the channel has more like it. Stories about people who took the long road, kept their eyes open, and waited for the right moment to act. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one drops. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, send it to them. See you in the next one.